Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie, Chapter 9. The steamer arrived early next morning at Zabulia. Cornelia Robson, her face beaming, a large flapping hat on her head, was one of the first to hurry on shore. Cornelia was not good at snubbing people. She was one of an amiable disposition and disposed to like all her fellow creatures. The sight of Hercule Poirot in a white suit, pink shirt, large black bow tie, and a white toupee did not make her wince, as the aristocratic Miss Von Schuler would assuredly have winced, as they would walk together up an avenue of sphinxes. She responded readily to his conventional opening. Your companions are now coming ashore to view the temple. Well, you see, Cousin Mary, that's Miss Von Schuler. Never gets up early. She has to be very, very careful of her health, and of course she wants Miss Bowers, that's a hospital nurse, to do things for her. And she said, too, that this isn't one of the best temples. Well, she was frightfully kind and said it would be quite all right for me to come. That was very gracious of her, said Poirot dryly. Yes, Cornelia agreed suspectingly. Oh, she is very kind. It's simply wonderful of her to bring me on this trip. I do feel I'm lucky. I'm a lucky girl. I just could hardly believe it when she suggested to Mother that I should come too. And you have enjoyed it, yes. Oh, it's been wonderful. I've seen Italy, Venice and Pavia and Pisa, and then Cairo. Only Cousin Mary wasn't very well in Cairo, so I couldn't get around much. And now, this wonderful trip up the Wadi Halfa and back, Poirot said, smiling. You have the happy nature, mademoiselle. He looked thoughtfully from her to Silent, frowning Rosaline, who was walking ahead by herself. She's very nice looking, isn't she? Said Cornelia, following his glance. Only kind of scornful looking. She's very English, of course. She's not as lovely as Miss Doyle. I think Miss Doyle's the loveliest, the most elegant woman I've ever seen, and her husband just worships the ground she walks on, doesn't he? I think that gray-haired lady is kind of distinguished looking, don't you? She's a cousin of Duke, I believe. She was talking about him right near us last night, but she isn't actually titled herself, is she? She isn't actually titled herself, is she? She prattled on until the dragoman in charge called a halt and began to intone. This temple was dedicated to Egyptian god Amu and the sun god Re-Harakat, whose symbol was a hawk's head. It droned on. Dr. Basner, Dicker in hand, mumbled to himself in German. He preferred the written word. Tim Ellerton had not joined the party. His mother was breaking the ice with the reserved Mr. Fanthorpe, and Andrew Pennington, his arm through Lynette Doyle, was listening attentively, seemingly most interested in the measurements as recited by the guide. 65 feet high. Is that so? Looks a little less to me. Great fellow, this Ramesses, an Egyptian live wire, a big businessman, Uncle Andrew. Andrew Pennington looked at her appreciatively. You look fine this morning, Lynette. I've been mite worried about you lately. You've looked kind of peaky. Chatting together, the party returned to the boat. Once the more Carnac glided up the river, the scenery was less stern now. There were poems cultivation. It was as though the change in the scenery had relieved some secret oppression that had brooded over the passengers. Tim Ellerton had got over his fit of the moodiness. Rosaline looked less sulky. Lynette seemed almost light-hearted. Pennington said to her, "It's tactless to talk business to a bride on her honeymoon, but there are just one or two things." "Why, of course, Uncle Andrew." Lynette at once became businesslike. "My marriage has made a difference, of course. That's just it. Since some time or other I want your signature to several documents. Why not now?" Andrew Pennington glanced around. The corner of the observation saloon was quite untenanted. Most of the people outside on the deck space between the observation saloon and the cabin, the only occupants of the saloon, were Mr. Ferguson, who was drinking beer at the small table in the middle, his legs encased in their dirty flannel trousers, stuck out in front of him, whilst he whistled to himself in the intervals of drinking, M. Hercule Poirot, who was sitting before him, and Miss Van Schuler, who was sitting in a corner reading a book. "That's fine," said Andrew Pennington. He left the saloon. Lynette and Simon smiled at each other, a slow smile that took a few minutes to come to full fruition. "All right, sweet?" he asked. "All right, sweet?" "All right, sweet?" he asked. "Yes, still all right. Funny how I'm not rattled anymore," Simon said with a deep conviction in his tone. "You're marvelous, Pennington. You're marvelous." Pennington came back. He brought with him a sheaf of closely written documents. "Mercy, mercy," cried Lynette. "I've got to sign all of these? All of these?" Andrew Pennington was apologetic. "It's tough on you, I know, but I'd just like to get your affairs put in proper shape. First of all, there's the lease of the Fifth Avenue property. Then there are the Western land concessions." He talked on, rustling and sorting the papers. Simon yawned. The door to the deck swung open, and Mr. Fanthorpe came in. He gazed aimlessly around, then strolled forward and stood by Poirot, looking out at the pale blue water and the yellow enveloping sands. "You sign just there," and included Pennington, spreading a paper before Lynette, indicating a space. Lynette picked up the document and glanced through it. She turned back once to the first page, and taking up the fountain pen Pennington had laid beside her, she signed her name, Lynette Doyle. Pennington took away the paper and spread out another. Fanthorpe wandered over in their direction. He peered out through the side window at something that seemed to interest him on the bank they were passing. "That's just the transfer," said Pennington. You needn't read it." But Lynette took a brief glance through it. Pennington laid down the third paper. Again Lynette perused it carefully. "They're all quite straightforward," said Andrew. "Nothing of interest, only legal phraseology." "My ass." Simon yawned again. "My dear girl, you're not going to read the whole lot through, are you? You'll be at it till lunchtime, and longer." "I always read everything through," said Lynette. "Father taught me to do that. He said there might be some clerical error." Pennington laughed rather harshly. "You're a grand woman of business, Lynette." She's much more conscientious than I'd be," said Simon, laughing. "I've never read a legal document in my life. I sign where they tell me to sign on the dotted line, and that's that." "That's frightfully slip-sloshed," said Lynette, disapprovingly. "I have no business head," declared Simon cheerfully. "Never had. A fellow tells me to sign, I sign. It's much the simplest way." Andrew Pennington was looking at him thoughtfully. He said dryly, stroking his upper lip, "A little risky sometimes, Doyle." "Nonsense," replied Simon. "I'm not one of those people who believe the whole world is out to do one down. I'm a trusting kind of fellow, and it pays, you know. I've hardly been let down." Suddenly, to everyone's surprise, the silent Mr. Fanthorpe swung around and addressed Lynette. I hope I'm not busting in, but you must let me say how much I admire your business-like capacity. In my profession, I am a lawyer. I find ladies sadly unbusinesslike. Never to sign a document unless you read it through is admirable. Although admirable. Altogether admirable. He gave a little bow, then rather red in his face, he turned once more to contemplate the banks of the Nile. Lynette looked rather uncertainly. Thank you. She bit her lip to repress a giggle. The young man had looked so pertinently solemn. Andrew Pennington looked seriously annoyed. Simon Doyle looked uncertain whether to be annoyed or amused. The backs of Mr. Fanthorpe's ears were bright crimson. Next, please, said Lynette, smiling at Pennington, but Pennington looked decidedly ruffled. I think perhaps some other time would be better, he said stiffly. As Doyle says, if you have to read through all these, we shall be here till lunchtime. We mustn't miss enjoying the scenery. Anyway, those first 2 papers were the only urgent ones. We'll settle down to business later. It's frightfully hot in here, said Lynette. Lynette said, let's go outside. The 3 of them passed through the swinging door. Hercule Poirot turned his head. His gaze rested thoughtfully on Mr. Fanthorpe's back. Then it shifted to the lounging figure of Mr. Ferguson, who had his head thrown back and was still whistling softly to himself. Finally, Poirot looked over at the upright figure of Miss Von Schuyler in her corner. Miss Von Schuyler was glaring at Mr. Ferguson. The swing door on the port side opened, and Cornelia Robson hurried in. You've been a long time, snapped the old lady. Where have you been? I'm so sorry, Cousin Mary. The wool wasn't where you said it was. It was in another case altogether. My dear child, you are perfectly hopeless at finding anything. You are willing, I know, my dear, but you must try to be a little cleverer and quicker. It only needs concentration. I'm so sorry, Cousin Mary. I'm afraid I am very stupid. Wow. Nobody need to be stupid if they try, my dear. I have brought you on this trip, and I accept a little attention in return. Cornelia flushed. I'm very sorry, Cousin Mary. And where is Miss Bowers? It was time for her drops 10 minutes ago. Please go and find her at once. The doctor said it was most important. But at this stage, Miss Bowers entered carrying a small medicine glass. Your drops, Miss Von Schuyler. I should have had them at 11, snapped the old lady. If there's one thing I detest, it's unpunctuality. Quite, said Miss Bowers. She glanced at her wristwatch. It's exactly half a minute to 11. By my watch, it's 10 past. I think you'll find my watch is right. It's a perfect timekeeper. It never loses or gains. Miss Bowers was quite imperturbable. Miss Von Schuyler swallowed the contents of the medicine glass. I feel definitely worse, she snapped. I'm so sorry to hear that, Miss Von Schuyler. Miss Bowers did not sound sorry. She sounded completely uninterested. She was obviously making the correct reply mechanically. It's too hot in here, snapped Miss Von Schuyler. Find me a chair on the deck, Miss Bowers. Cornelia, bring my knitting. Don't be clumsy, or drop it. And I think I shall want you to wind some wool. The procession passed out. Mr. Ferguson sighed, stirred his legs, and remarked to the world at large, "Gosh, I'd like to crag that dame." Poirot asked interestedly, "She is a type you dislike?" Dislike? I should say so. What good has that woman ever been to anyone or anything? She's never worked or lifted a finger. She's just battened on other people. She's a parasite, and a damned unpleasant parasite. There are a lot of people on this boat I'd say the world could do without. Really? Yes, that girl in here just now, sending share transfers and throwing her weight about. Hundreds and thousands of wretched workers slaving for a mere pittance to keep her in silk stockings and useless luxuries. One of the richest women in England. So someone told me, and never done a hand's turn in her life. Who told you she was one of the richest women in England? Mr. Ferguson cast a belligerent eye at him. A man you wouldn't be seen speaking to. A man who works with his hands and isn't ashamed of it. Not one of your dressed-up, foppish, good-for-nothings. His eye rested unfavorably on the bow tie and pink shirt. Me, I work with my brain, and am not ashamed of it, said Poirot, answering the glance. Mr. Ferguson merely snorted. Out to be shot, the lot of them, he asserted. My dear young man, said Poirot, what a passion you have for violence. Can you tell me of any good that can be done without it? You've got to break down and destroy before you can build up. It is certainly much easier and much noisier and more spectacular. What do you do for a living? Nothing at all. I bet probably call yourself a middleman. Nothing at all. I bet probably call yourself a middleman. I am not a middleman. I am a top man, declared Hercule Poirot with a slight arrogance. What are you? I am a detective, said Hercule Poirot with a modest air of one who says, I am a king. Good God, the young man seemed seriously taken aback. Do you mean that girl actually totes about a dumb dick? Is she as careful of her precious skin as that? I have no connection whatever with Monsieur and Madame Doyle, said Poirot stiffly. I am on holiday, enjoying a vacation. And you? Is it not that you are on holiday also? Holiday? Mr. Ferguson snorted. Then he added cryptically, I'm studying conditions. Very interesting, murmured Poirot, and moved gently out onto the deck. Miss Fauchelevent was established in the best corner. Cornelia knelt in front of her, her arms outstretched with a skein of grey wool upon them. Miss Bowers was sitting very upright, reading the Saturday Evening Post. Poirot wandered gently onward down the starboard deck as she passed round the stern of the boat. He almost ran into a woman who turned a startled face towards him, a dark, piquant Latin face. She was neatly dressed in black and had been standing talking to a big, burly man in uniform, one of the engineers. By the look of him, there was a queer expression on both their faces, guilt and alarm. Poirot wondered what they had been talking about. He rounded the stern and continued his walk along the port side. A cabin door opened and Miss Otterburn emerged and nearly fell into his arms. She was wearing a scarlet satin dressing gown. So sorry, she apologized. Dear Mr. Poirot, so sorry. So very sorry. The motion, just the motion, never did have any sea legs. If the boat would only keep still. She clutched at his arm. It's the pitching I can't stand. Never really happy at sea. And left all alone here left all alone here, hour after hour. That girl of mine, no sympathy, no understanding of her poor old mother's mother who's done everything for her. Miss Otterburn began to weep. Slave for her, I have worn myself at the bone. To the bone. Our grande amours. It's in French, so I can't read it correctly. That's what I might have been. A grande amours. Sacrificed everything, and nobody cares. But I'll tell everyone. I'll tell them now. How she neglects me. How hard she is making me come on this journey. Bored to death. I'll go and tell them now. She surged forward. Poirot gently repressed the action. I will send her to you, madame. Re-enter your cabin. It is better that way. No, I want to tell everyone on the boat. It is too dangerous, madame. The sea is too rough. You might be swept overboard. Miss Otterburn looked at him doubtfully. You think so? You really think so? I do. He was successful. Miss Otterburn faltered, and re-entered her cabin. Poirot's nostrils twitched once or twice. Then he nodded and walked onto where Rosaline Otterburn was sitting between Mrs. Allerton and Tim. Your mother wants you, mademoiselle. She had been laughing quite happily. Now her face clouded over. She shot a quick, suspicious look at him and hurried along the deck. Can't make that child out, said Mrs. Allerton. She varies. So, one day she's friendly, the next she's positively rude. Thoroughly spoiled. And bad-tempered, said Tim. Miss Allerton shook her head. No, I don't think it's that. I think she's unhappy. Tim shrugged his shoulders. Oh, well, I suppose we've all got our private troubles. His voice sounded hard and curt. A booming noise was heard. Lunch, cried Miss Allerton delightedly. I'm starving. That evening, Poirot noticed that Miss Allerton was sitting talking to Miss von Schuyler. As he passed, Miss Allerton closed one eye and opened it again. She was saying, of course at Caulifre's castle, the dear Duke, Cornelia released from her attendance, was out on the deck. She was listening to Dr. Besner, who was instructing her somewhat ponderously in Egyptology, as curled from the pages of Beckedor. Cornelia listened with rapt attention. Leaning over the rail, Tim Allerton was saying, anyhow, it's a rotten world. Rosaline Otterburn answered, it's unfair. Some people have everything, Poirot sighed. He was glad that he was no longer young.